Hello, everyone, and welcome. People popping in. Let a few more participants trickle in. Okay, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today, AI Use Case Checklist, Turning Vision into Action. My name is Tiffany Texador, and I'm here today with Adar Garg. Adar is the Managing Director of AI for Educate 360, and he works with our customers to help them identify AI priorities, execute on those priorities, as well as identify the leadership, project management, and technical skills for long-term success. Thanks for being here, Adar. And I want to thank everyone for participating wherever you are in your AI journey. We are here to help, and today we're going to talk about how to really turn that vision into action and some practical tips. Before we get started, when I ask my first question, let's see where everyone is in their AI journey. I'm really curious to know right now, Marielle, if you want to drop a poll. And Mariella is moderating our chat today. This is an interactive experience, so please notice the chat button on the bottom. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll try and answer them throughout, and if not, we will try and make some time at the end. So a lot of people just starting to explore. We're seeing that a lot. And while these are coming in, Adar, everyone is talking about AI, and there's a lot of buzz, and you can see people are evaluating, they're using some tools, they're starting to explore, but various sources are saying that 70 to 85% of AI projects fail. So why do you think that organizations are struggling to move their AI vision into successful implementation?
So, I think it all comes down to clarity of what the leadership team wants the people in the field or, with their hands on the keyboard to actually do with AI. It's all about clarity. We typically see two types of programs that come into play, right? So sometimes it's a technology-driven thing, or it's like we got to keep up with the market. Everyone else is giving AI to their employees. I'm going to give AI to my employees, right? So Copilot gets deployed out to hundreds or thousands of people, right? And then people come back and look at it a year later and say, hey, like I'm not realizing the value from making that investment. Copilot is a significant technology expense when I look at my other technology expenses, and I don't see the direct impact. Well, so we have some of those bottoms up cases, right, where people are failing to see the value. Then we have some top-down cases where like people say, hey, like these are the big strategic projects that we're going to go invest in. They start to actually like build even custom AIs or, at least custom configurations to enable those specific use cases. And then downstream, like those use cases either aren't used by the people that are intended to use them, people forget about it, right? Those use cases don't deliver the value, like they're being used, but something else happened in that complex web of value creation, and the value that was anticipated for that use case doesn't play out. So in both of those cases, right, like it all gets down to identifying the right use cases and then prioritizing them effectively. And you've really got to prioritize them against what will be valuable for the business, what are people actually going to want to use, right? So not just technology for technology's sake. And then like, is there some engineer out there somewhere that can do it, right? Like that raises their hand and says, yeah, that's possible to do, right? If we de-risk the use case up front by making sure that all of those things are done properly, then we can really ensure that the organization only invests in those key use cases.
And I think that's critical because the rush to implement, either to keep up with the industry or because there's something exciting and new, without the communication, without the actual prioritization and understanding of how it's going to be utilized, is probably a critical reason why people fail. And so let's talk a little bit about use cases specifically. I know you tell me all the time about like 3 critical elements to a use case and prioritizing your strategy, which are feasibility, desirability, and viability. Can you define each of those 3 pieces and why they're critical to a strategic initiative?
Yeah, so I kind of previewed these in my earlier statement, but feasibility is all about the technical elements, right? Is it possible to do this with the technology of today? If not with the technology of today, right? Like what would need to change about the technology to make it work, right? So like it may be so like I'm working on a project with the team in the lab right now, right? And it's something where we're trying to get some real-time engagement going in an audio-visual format. And I keep telling the team that like from a feasibility perspective, like we needed to have sub-second latency, right? Like if the pause is too long, we break the experience, we're not going to deliver the value that we're looking for, right? So like that's a tight feasibility constraint. We've defined what we need to achieve from a technical perspective, sub-second, sub 500 millisecond latency, right? And so now the technology team is like trying to make it work. And they may come back and say, hey, like not possible to do everything you want to do with today's technology, with the operational budget, with like not going to work, right? Like, so from a feasibility perspective, okay, then how do we descope that, right? To make it possible. So that's how like feasibility works. And that's some of the flexibility that we have around feasibility. I always like to say, like, I'm an engineer at heart, right? And to an engineer, like impossible is just infinite time and infinite money, right? Like you give me enough money and enough time to accomplish something and a clear enough vision of what that needs to be. And like I truly believe that we can build it. And so then like it starts to get into those other features, right? Well, okay, what's worth a lot of money? What's worth a lot of time? What's worth a little money and a little time and worth it because we get a little benefit, right? That's one of the exciting things about the time and age that we live in. When I got started in enterprise AI, you needed to have a big budget, a big program. It was only accessible to like the Fortune 500s, right? Now AI is accessible to everybody because the level of investment required is way smaller, right? And the technology has gotten to a point where like the building blocks are there to solve a lot of really interesting problems. And so that's why I'm so excited to bring out this capability through Educate 360 is that like, we cover such a broad swath of the American economy when you look at our customer base through our training capabilities. If we can help them level up their game on how to use I think that we can really like drive the value delivery that's possible with this big kind of societal moment that we live in of like these technologies getting good enough to do some of this stuff.
So we talked about feasibility, like, is it feasible? Is it possible? Can we even build it? Is this, without infinite resources and infinite time and money, is it feasible? Okay, so that's check one. Yes, it's
Yeah.
feasible. We have the engineers, we have the software, we have the talent to do this. So let's talk about desirability and viability. So how do those play in and how do you define those?
Yeah. So like let's say that, I'm a mad scientist, I go into the lab, I build something amazing, and or at least I think it's amazing, right? And I bring it out and nobody wants to use it, right? That's what happens if you don't consider desirability. It's all about that end user who needs to be able to understand what that thing is, understand what value it brings to them in their like job that they're trying to get done or task that they're trying to resolve or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And then it needs to be easy to use, right? There needs to be some element of trust in that thing for them to really use it when they need it. Um, right? Like all of that kind of factors into desirability. Um, and the key thing that we're looking for there, or I guess the approach that we use as we try to gauge desirability and we try to really refine desirability around a use case is, we think about the design thinking framework in a soft sense, right? Like not in a very dogmatic or rigid way, but more generally, like who's the user? What are they trying to get done? How do they do it today? What are the pain points there? And then how can I solve those pain points with X, right? With my solution. Now that solution, we go back to feasibility, right? And it's like, okay, well, what are the things that solution needs to do? Oh, it needs to have sub millisecond latency. It needs to look like, Apple's next OS release, and it needs to, like we can lay out all of those requirements, and then like the engineers get to work on it, right? But like there's a lot of work that goes into defining that thing that people are actually going to want to use. I spent more of my career doing SAP implementations than I like to admit sometimes. And those interfaces were, they were like forms and tables and lots of like, click on this tab, do this, do that, then you can finally like enter in the note that you're trying to enter. Um, and yeah, a lot of people didn't like using them. We had to do a lot of training, right? Because like that's a complex web. There were, I mean, those guide sheets were a bear to build out. Um, but like all of that was needed because the software wasn't built from the perspective of that end user. It was built from the perspective of like, what can an engineer do to solve the CFO's problem?
Right. And I think what you said, it just makes so much sense, because if you build it, they will come is not the methodology here. You can build something, but unless you truly communicate what the expectations are, unless you tell people how to use it, and you set guardrails and standards and have a use case for why they should be using it, it's a wasted investment. And so nobody wants to spend a ton of money on software and development just to find out that the people sitting at the desk this was supposed to help is just, complicated. And raise your hand if anyone has ever had a leader or a manager deploy some fantastic software that they were really excited about that either didn't get the job done or they didn't explain how to use it. Show of hands, that ever happened? I know it's happened to me. I've been guilty of being like, team, here's this great project management software. Go have fun. And everyone's like, what even is this? It's so cumbersome. It's confusing. So let's talk about real world examples of how would I know that my team's going to use it? How do I know if I should be doing this? So you recently told me about an AI use case that you performed with a city in California. And in talking me through that, the ahas were just incredible. So can you talk to us a little bit about that project from start to finish, and the outcomes?
Yeah, so happy to talk about it. And you're going to see that notion of desirability, feasibility, viability kind of come through. But you're also going to see that like I'm not dogmatic about these things as we engage with our clients. So this was, as you said, a relatively small local government in Colorado, about 100,000 citizens in this jurisdiction, just to give you a sense of size, right? So we're talking in like the mid-market size of local governments. And like when I went in, they weren't really sure what to expect of the day. And so we did our intros, and then I just started asking them questions about their day, right? Now, ahead of time, we had a great sponsor at the city who had brought us in and arranged for this workshop. And ahead of time, we had made sure that we had the key end users of the solution, whatever it is that we would envision, in the room for that workshop, right? So like I knew that if I could figure out a way to use AI to solve for their needs, we would have desirability checked. I also had a sense of like a business problem that would allow us to have viability checked, right? That our sponsor had shared with me. And I have a good sense of what we can do with AI, right? So the goal of the workshop was to bring these three things together into a solution that works for the city. We talked about their day. That's how we started the day, right? So like just really long intros, right? And then we talked about some of the pain points of their days. And they were like, oh, the phones are ringing off the hook. Like we're responding to all these emails that have nothing to do with our department, but like we're the only people, like we're one of the people that citizens have relationships. And so they're like, oh, that's my guy at the city, right? And they'll like ask questions that aren't related. And so like they're doing all of that type of stuff. Then they started to describe some of the clerical things that they have to do throughout their day. Oh, like we get all of these applications and we have to make sure that they're properly filled out and that they have all the required attachments, and like all of the pre-work that happens before you can really analyze the thing. So okay, I understood their list of pain points. And then I was like, okay, so I heard about this thing over here. right? Like, can you guys tell me a little bit more about this thing over here? And that thing was a gnarly tangled mess, right? Like I'm going to protect the innocent here and not go too far into the details, but gnarly tangled mess, right? And they were like, oh, so is AI going to solve that, right? And I'm like on the whiteboard, like, drafting out this gnarly tangled mess, and I'm like, no, I think that at least not initially, right? Like that's not where we want to start your AI journey.
Like, let's
I
start with
think
those emails that Bob's getting. That seems a little easier.
yeah, right. Like let's try to have something that actually informs the citizens in this case, right? And so then I was like, okay, well, like your daily pain is over here. This is where the business value is, right? So how are we going to make these two things come together, right? Um, and so then I started to be like, okay, well, how much time do we spend doing all these things, right? And there were 5 things that we had identified. And by the time we added it all up, 2 of them were 2 FTEs. That's like maybe 10 to 20% of this whole team, right?
So two
Was
full-time employees doing these activities that were so time consuming and not really getting to the core of their business value or purpose.
I could classify it relatively as administrative work,
Got
right?
it.
And from my AI lens, I was able to look at it from a feasibility perspective and say, yeah, like these 2 things, like I can see us being able to build some AI solution that can resolve these 2 things. But then the business value of that is 2 people, right? And like the city is not going to let go of these 2 people. And so, well, now these 2 people can go solve that big, gnarly problem that really had all of these edge cases, all of this stuff that like, humans are just really good at being able to untangle. Once they define those rules, if they find more of these, like, hey, like this thing is just like it can be well defined um and it's complex and inside the box, and I need the AI to do that, then yeah, like that becomes a new AI use case, right? And we can look at it through the lens of desirability, feasibility, and viability. But when I looked at those 3 lenses for that big gnarly thing, the viability was there. Like that's the moneymaker for
Mhm.
this department. But then like um, the desirability wasn't there because I could tell that like this is such a gnarly problem. It's gonna be hard to get the trust of the people to use this thing, even if we build it, right? And
Mhm.
the feasibility wasn't there because it's a big gnarly problem. We don't really understand the depth of it. There are going to be all of these like random edge cases that we're going to uncover as we go, right? Like I just saw that being a long technical implementation. And so, and we're getting started with this city government on their AI journey, right? Like we need to build some momentum with something that drives value early, and has broader appeal. So that's kind of how we work through desirability, feasibility, and viability, was to say, well, like let's take out some of this administrative work by using AI. The resources that we free, the people time that we free up by doing that, let's take that people time and apply it to this big gnarly problem. They can start to untangle the web a little bit, right? And then if they find something that's like, hey, like in this, so like one of the use cases we went after, the city has a municipal code that is thousands of pages long. And so, like, surprise, I haven't read my city's municipal code. I don't know, Tiffany, if you have, but like, that's not how I spend my weekend. So anyway, like, they needed a bot that could answer those questions because that's how they would know what some of the answers to these emailed questions are, right? Um, and so we ingested that code and we put up a little interface and we're like, okay, well, like, this can be used to auto respond to some of those emails. You could put a chat interface like this up on your website so that maybe the email never comes to you because they just chat on the website, right? Like we can do all of these. We can put it on your intranet, on your Teams, right, as a bot, so that then like people can just hit it instead of like sending a message out to a colleague. Um, so we can expose it through all of these channels, right? Like that's then where we started to take that solution, right? Once we said, okay, if we can solve like answering questions against these thousands of pages of reference material, right? Then like we can save people's time that are responding to those things manually today and looking those things up manually today. And we can deliver better experiences across all of these other channels.
Yeah, I think that the biggest takeaway from that experience to me was, we want AI to fix this. We're going to build AI to do this, and then coming to the table, with an objective, use case workshop to say, I don't know if that's the best use case for AI, but this stuff over here, we can totally build this with AI and it'll free up we're not replacing humans with AI, but if we can free up 2 full-time employees' time to then tackle this other thing, meanwhile, they could have gone and spent months trying to build something to solve for this, when in the meantime, you can solve these other problems. And just by going through that workshop, doing that checklist, asking those questions, you save huge potential investments that will ultimately have such a greater return. So those are the big takeaways for me on that. I did want to see if there's any questions from the audience, about where you're struggling, what are you looking for, how are you hoping to launch your AI, and what are some of the biggest barriers that you have towards AI in your organization? If you want to drop some comments in the chat, I'd be interested to hear that. Even some of the, we talk about use cases for these sort of big gnarly problems, as you called them, but for companies that are just, they're just installing Copilot. Is it necessary for them to have a checklist if it's just turning Copilot on? I mean, that seems like a pretty easy user interface, right? Do they still need a checklist for adoption and implementation?
Yeah, so a lot of organizations have tried to just turn it on and not provide any enablement, any guidance on how to use the technology. And a lot of those organizations end up calling us about 12 months later saying, hey, like no one's using this thing. Like how can you help us start to adopt and use this thing? So then we start to talk about like, okay, well, like, is anyone using it? Oh yeah, like 25% of the people are. Okay, what are they doing? And they're like using it for meeting summaries and notes, and that's it, right? Like they're not going beyond that, which by the way is an amazing use case, right? Like don't get me wrong, I love that use case. But there's so much more that these technologies can do. And so, then we start to talk to them about what good enablement looks like. Um, and a pattern that a lot of the folks are gravitating towards is we just want a really short overview of what all of the capabilities do, right? Of Microsoft Copilot, because it's integrated into Outlook, Teams, and like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Um, and so like how it works within all of those different applications, how it works on the web. And then they want to take it into a like hackathon session, essentially. It's more of a promptathon, right? Because like no one's actually writing any code. But it's all about like, we want the finance people to sit, if it's in person, on the same table as other finance people. And for them to talk about like, oh, well, in accounts receivable, every month I have to go open every vendor's contract, remind myself what the payment terms are there, right? And make sure that our invoices are in alignment with those payment terms. Accounts payable often raises their hands and says, hey, same thing, right? Okay, well, now that's a problem that we have across the finance organization that could be really interesting to solve, right? We have the instructor who's going table to table, right? So we'll take like a group of 20 people that are doing a hackathon. We'll split it up into 4 groups of 5 folks each. And if it's virtual, we'll do breakout rooms. If it's in person, we'll have them sit at separate tables. And we'll have them talk about like the things that they do that feel administrative in nature, right? Okay, now all of this information sits in Microsoft somewhere. How can I use it to solve the things that I do every day? So they come up with those problem statements. They start to go explore those problem statements. anytime that they have a question, they can raise their hand. The instructor pops over, is like, hey, how can I help you? Hey, I'm trying to do this thing in Excel, right? And at that point, the instructor is like, oh, okay, well, if you're trying to do that, here's how I would prompt it. Here's how I would break it down, right? And here's how I would go execute that thing. Now, our instructors are brilliant, right? Like they're amazing, but they are not the subject matter experts in how your company's accounts receivable process works, right? Your company's AR people are the experts in that. And so we find that hackathon to just be a fantastic way to bring those expertise elements together and to really get people working together. Another thing that happens in that hackathon model is that like I call these folks the sleeper agents, right? Like you have some people that over that year that they had access to the tool weren't actually using it, right? In companies that haven't rolled out any tool, they're using it in their personal lives, right? Like they're the sleeper agents. And so as you get these 6 people together, odds are that at least one of them is like using the technology, finds it interesting, is already kind of up the learning curve a little bit there. And so like we have one instructor floating across 4 groups, right? But we have these sleeper agents inside of each of the groups. Now, these sleeper, like once the people that aren't sleeper agents identify, oh, like Tiffany really knows GPT, not to out you, Tiffany, but Tiffany really knows GPT, right? If I have questions around GPT, I should just ping Tiffany, right? And think about what that does to your organization. So now everyone goes back after the hackathon, goes back into their daily lives. And I'm in accounts receivable, Tiffany's in accounts payable. We just talked about that use case. I'm stuck, right? I can just ping Tiffany.
I think that, so we have, governance and security is something we always get questions about. Reluctance to fully adapt to AI outside of Copilot and ChatGPT. And I think that, the one thing that I would guess you would say, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but the one thing that I recognize from my team is that you have these sleeper agents, you have people using them in different ways. And when we get together and say, here's how I use it, here's how I use it, or not even here's how I use it, but man, this is so monotonous and so frustrating that I have to do this every single day. That's when you get to the good stuff about, okay, well, let's create a use case. Let's define how we're using it. And so I think without defining how you're going to use it, that's where, because if everything's possible, but you don't define what you need, then it's really hard to actually be successful. But without putting words in your mouth, what is the final
Yeah,
piece of advice that you would give anyone on this call as far as like if you're struggling to adopt, what's the first step and the next steps?
just I would say get started, right? And it really depends on the goals that you have for the technology, right? So like if you're just trying to enable your people and you think that there are just operational efficiencies out there that they could realize from like a chat GPT or a Copilot type rollout, then yeah, like think of what those general things are and maybe enable them with some training. If you're interested in like achieving specific strategic goals with the power of AI, right? And there are key objectives at the corporate level or at the company level or at the business unit level that you think um, that a fresh look and applying this technology could impact in a big way, then you've really got to start defining what those problems are. You've really got to start sizing the value of solving those problems. You got to start thinking about the technical complications in solving those problems properly and effectively. That's where governance and security comes in, is making sure that you're using data that's well protected. You're using solutions that are effectively safeguarding the corporate assets that you're leveraging and as you're using the tools. But yeah, like it starts by defining the problem, defining its value, and then starting to work with folks who understand the technology to see how the technology could be used.
We're getting some good questions, and this one's very specific. So maybe we'll respond in a email afterwards. But the city adoption example, were you able to get great pricing from the AI model. I think that was mentioned for some models that were offering competitive pricing for the government space.
So, I mean, we were just looking at using the capabilities that are available on Azure, the OpenAI capability. Based on our projections, like the operating cost of the whole solution was not going to be very high, right? So it would deliver a ton of value, but we were projecting the operating cost to be a few $100s a month. Um, Typically where I see like the like cloud providers give major discounts, they're giving them at like the state or federal levels. And so actually the way that I think it works in government is that like the state can do like a frame agreement with the cloud provider. But really that's something that's like between the cloud provider and either the city government or the state that does the frame agreement. We really focus in on like with that toolkit, how can we help you solve the business problems that you're after, right? And then like how do we use that toolkit to solve those business problems? The pricing and negotiation of how much those models cost, what you know, what the rest of that cloud solution looks like, all of the other cloud services that you end up using on either Azure or AWS or GCP, right? Like the the cloud provider is the one to speak with on all of those pricing questions.
Thank you so much, Dart. Thank you, everyone. I know we're right at time. This is really helpful, and we're going to drop a resource. Yeah, Mariella just dropped a resource in on our use case strategy guide that kind of goes a little bit deeper into what makes a good use case, what are the benefits of a use case. And we started offering this because we know that AI is complicated, and we were seeing our customers struggle to even identify the skills that they needed to truly implement AI. So we took it a step back to help them zoom out on, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish first? Then we can identify what are the skills that you need, what are the communications, what are the project management tasks. So thank you so much for Adar for all of your help in that initiative and for joining us today. And we will be sending out a recording of this, and please feel free, we'll have a contact us button on there if you want to set some time aside to do an AI consultation on your next steps. We are here for that too. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.